Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. In the face of Lucian's accusation, everyone hastily explained, "It's effective. When you were inside just now, Ms. Jarvis' brain waves fluctuated greatly." The look in Lucian's eyes was frightfully grim. If so, why is she still not awake? At that question, the specialists looked at each other. Because the stimulation is still insufficient. You must have mentioned something she cares about earlier. We all feel that she's close to regaining consciousness. Following that remark, Lucian's expression turned even colder. It left them without a shadow of a doubt that the man would dismiss them if they were to tarry any longer in offering a solution. Should we propose to have Ms. Jarvis' 2 kids come and talk to her? Perhaps she'll then wake up. The specialist remembered Lucian's objection a while ago, so he sounded exceedingly cautious. Have Archie and Benny come? A frown marred Lucian's countenance, and aggravation brimmed in his eyes. She's now unconscious, but if she were awake, she would certainly not want the 2 kids to see her in such a condition. She wouldn't want to worry them. Yet, according to the specialists, that's the only way left. I understand your concern, Mr. Farwell. But if Miss Jarvis remains unconscious, the kids will learn about this matter sooner or later. The later they find out about this, the greater the fear they will experience. Biting the bullet, the specialist insisted on having the boys come over. Lucian's gaze darkened time and again. A moment later, he relented. He got it. So, the specialists were about to speak further when the man before them abruptly pivoted and went back into the hospital room. Seeing that, they exchanged glances, entirely baffled. Before he returned to the room, he only said, "Got it." What does that mean? Is he going to bring the 2 kids over or not? In the hospital room, Lucian stood beside Roxanne and stated solemnly, "The doctor suggested that I bring Archie and Benny over to talk to you. You probably don't want them to know about this, right?" After he had said that, he fixated his eyes on the woman on the hospital bed, his gaze somber. When he saw that she was still unresponsive, he finally took out his phone and gave Caden a call. It was already late at night then. Caden had just finished bathing. Unfortunately, the guilt within him kept him awake. As soon as he saw his employer's caller ID, he swiftly climbed out of bed and answered the call. What do you need from me, Mr. Farwell?" Go to Roxanne's house and drive the 2 kids over." Lucian's voice was stained with weariness. Hearing that, Caden was stunned. Has Miss Jarvis regained consciousness, Mr. Farwell?" That was the only possibility he could think of. However, Lucian said nothing. In no time, understanding dawned upon Caden. Roxanne was still unconscious. In that case, why is he having the 2 kids over? At the sight of their mother unconscious, they'll undoubtedly cry. In a flash, the guilt he had been trying hard to suppress surged forward again. Since Roxanne was still unconscious, it stood to reason that Lucian must be in a foul mood. Not daring to ask any more questions, Caden merely murmured an acknowledgement. Subsequently, he got up and headed to Roxanne's house. Meanwhile, Archie and Benny weren't in bed yet. They were still sitting on the couch, waiting for their mother to return home. However, it was going to be 9:30 soon, and there were still no signs of Roxanne. They called her, but her phone had been turned off. Verily, they were both fearful and worried. Could something really have happened to Mommy, Archie? Benny grabbed his brother's hand nervously. Archie bit his lip, his heart heavy. Just when they were discussing whether to go out and look for Roxanne, the doorbell rang out of the blue. Is Mommy home?" Benny leaped off the couch excitedly. Likewise, Archie sprang to his feet. The 2 boys trotted over to the mansion door and turned on the video intercom for a look. When they saw the person standing at the door, their faces promptly fell. "Archie, Benny, it's me. Open the door. Quick." Haunted by guilt, Caden sounded incredibly gentle. The boys begrudgingly opened the door. What's the matter, Mr. Lawson? Was it Mommy who sent you here?" Caden's gaze was conflicted. Yeah. I'll bring you both to see her now." The instant Benny heard that, his eyes lit up. Conversely, Archie's heart sank with worry. It's late now. If Mommy wanted to see us, she could have come by herself. Since she asked Mr. Lawson to come and pick us up, there's a high possibility that something had happened to her. Did something happen to our Mommy, Mr. Lawson?" He stared at Caden seriously, his expression grave. At the knowing look in Archie's eyes, Caden opened his mouth, but he didn't quite know how to tell the boy the truth. A long moment passed before he simply muttered, "You'll know when we reach." Only then did Benny belatedly realize that something was amiss. His expression gradually froze. Having long since braced himself for bad news, Archie took his brother's hand and inclined his head at Caden. Bring us there." Caden turned away and nodded, lacking the guts to look them in the eye. Whirling around, he strode toward the car. When they reached the car door, he bent down and carried Archie and Benny into the car, one after another. Throughout the drive, all three of them were in a subdued mood. By the time they arrived at the entrance of the hospital, Zane already had someone waiting at the door. As soon as the person saw them approaching, he immediately rushed forward and greeted, "Are you Mr. Lawson? Mr. Farwell and the others are already waiting upstairs." After saying that, he shifted his gaze to Archie and Benny with sympathy brimming in his eyes. Archie and Benny keenly sensed the stranger's gaze. Once more, unease swamped them. Shortly after, they arrived at the top floor under the staff's lead. Lucian stood at the hospital room door with his face devoid of expression. Beside him were a group of terrified specialists and also Zane. Mr. Farwell. Stepping forward, Archie and Benny went over to Lucian. Lucian tilted his head slightly at them before glancing over his shoulder at the hospital room. Even he didn't quite know how to tell the boys about Roxanne's condition at that moment. Before he could organize his words, Archie's juvenile voice rang out. Did something happen to Mommy? How is she right now?" His voice was calm, and he sounded just like an adult. As he spoke, he even grasped his brother's hand in consolation. The young boy's sensibility made Lucian's heart clench bitterly. Archie and Benny waited for some time, but Lucian remained silent. Thus, they pinned their gazes on the few men in white coats behind the man. Needless to say, the few specialists couldn't withstand their intent stare. Just as they were about to explain, Lucian's voice broke the silence. There was an accident when your mommy was carrying out an experiment, and she passed out. But don't worry, for her life isn't in danger. She merely hasn't woken up yet." Lucian tried his best to sound gentle and soothing. When Archie and Benny heard that, their expressions changed drastically. "No wonder we've been feeling uneasy the entire day. Something had really happened to Mommy." Mommy. Knowing that Roxanne was in the hospital room behind Lucian, Benny immediately sprinted forward to go in for a look. Lucian was already distressed because of Roxanne's condition. At the sight of Archie and Benny in such anguish, another wave of sorrow washed over him. Nonetheless, he still reached out and held Benny back. Anxious to see his mother, Benny struggled desperately. "I want to see Mommy. Mommy." Despite that, Lucian's grip on him remained firm. Seeing Benny in tears, the few specialists felt sorry for him. However, if they were to allow Archie and Benny to barge in, the boys would likely throw themselves at Roxanne and wail incessantly. That would be of no help to the treatment. On the contrary, Archie was far calmer than his brother. Although his eyes were also red-rimmed, he merely stood there quietly. "What do you need me and Benny to do?" "Mommy has likely been unconscious for a long time. At the very least, she has already been in such a condition when Mr. Lawson picked us up from school. At that time, Daddy asked him to keep it a secret from us. But now, Daddy suddenly had him bring us here. As such, there must be something in which he needs our help." Archie and Benny's devastation had utterly broken the specialists' hearts. However, Archie's calmness under such circumstances left them in awe. A strange look flitted across Lucian's eyes, but he swiftly gathered his wits. He started, do you still remember the play we staged back then?" In response, Archie bobbed his head. Lifting his hand, Lucian stroked the boy's head and elaborated in a deep voice. "Your mommy is Sleeping Beauty right now. She's merely asleep and needs you two to wake her up. Don't cry after entering the room. Instead, talk to her." Sniffling, Archie nodded. He understood. After saying that, he reached out and took his brother's hand. Initially, Benny was bawling ceaselessly. When Archie grasped his hand, he slowly fell silent, though tears continued streaming down his face. Can we go in now?" Archie looked up at the adults in front of him, nodding profusely. The few specialists made way for the boys. Lucian spun around, leading Archie and Benny into the hospital room. No sooner had he opened the hospital room door than the two boys rushed over to the hospital bed on their short legs. Mommy." As Benny gazed at Roxanne's sleeping countenance, his tears, which had finally ceased, started pouring again. At long last, Archie similarly couldn't control his emotions any longer and started crying. Meanwhile, Lucian stood at the door. He waited for a few seconds before dragging his feet into the room. Be good, and don't cry anymore. Talk to your mommy. She must be eager to hear your voices." Through their tears, Archie and Benny nodded. Lucian turned and cast a look at the woman on the bed. "Archie and Benny are here. Hurry up and wake up." Having said that, he gazed solemnly at the boys before pivoting and retreating to the corner. Flinging themselves at the hospital bed, Archie and Benny clutched Roxanne's hand outside the covers. They found her hand warm, as though someone else had been holding it earlier. Nevertheless, they hadn't the time to ponder upon it. In juvenile voices, they started speaking into Roxanne's ear. "We're worried sick about you, Mommy. Can you please not sleep anymore? We're scared. Hurry up and wake up, Mommy. If you wake up, we'll behave and listen to you. We'll never make you mad anymore." As they spoke, they began choking on tears. Even Lucian couldn't bear listening to them any longer. However, when he shifted his gaze to Roxanne, he saw that her eyes remained tightly shut. Lucian couldn't help taking Roxanne to task inwardly. "Are you really this ruthless, Roxanne? Archie and Benny are in tears by your bed. Don't you feel sorry for them at all? Why are you not waking up?" Throughout it all, Archie and Benny's weeps echoed in the hospital room. Lucian forcefully slammed his fist against the wall behind him before storming out of the hospital room. Well, are her brain waves fluctuating? The chilliness around him was so intense that it might condense into ice. If there's no response from Roxanne when Archie and Benny are crying their hearts out, I will never let these quack doctors who proposed such a dumb idea off the hook. As a matter of fact, the specialists were also keeping an eye on the situation in the hospital room. When they saw Archie and Benny wailing, they were as anxious as Lucian. "Mr. Farwell, you can come over here and have a look." A specialist stood and offered his seat, urging Lucian over for a look at the brain waves fluctuation. Leaning down, Lucian swept his gaze over the screen, only to see that the curve was fluctuating violently. The curve fluctuated as well when you spoke to Ms. Jarvis earlier, but not as intense as this. Pointing at the curve, the specialist continued explaining, "It's evident that having the kids talk to her is effective to a certain degree." Lucian's brows knitted together deeply. Since Roxanne can hear the kids, why is she not waking up? The thought of Archie and Benny weeping so hard that they could barely breathe had him seized by the urge to kill the person who poisoned Roxanne. When the specialist glanced at the window and saw that Archie and Benny were blubbering so badly that they couldn't speak anymore, he bit the bullet and advised Lucian, "Mr. Farwell, the kids aren't doing so well. You should go in and look in on them." Putting his thoughts away, Lucian returned to the room with huge strides. "Mr. Farwell." Sobbing, Benny grabbed his hand and led him to the side of the hospital bed. Lucian allowed the boy's sweaty hand to grab onto him. Reaching the hospital bed, he stared down at Roxanne's sleeping countenance. Sniveling, Benny asked, can Mommy really hear us? Why is she not awake yet? Lucian lifted his hand and patted the boy on the head in consolation. In an uncertain tone, he assured, yes, she has heard you. She's also trying her best to wake up. Let's help her by continue talking G to her. Skepticism was written all over Archie and Benny's faces. Regretfully, Lucian didn't know how else he could comfort them. Benny couldn't resist reaching out and giving his mother a push. Following that, Roxanne's body swayed. Upon seeing that, Lucian frowned slightly. Just as he wanted to stop Benny from doing so, Archie's voice drifted into his ear. Mommy. Archie had seemingly discovered something. He snapped his eyes up at Lucian. A quick, look, Mr. Farwell. Is Mommy going to wake up? Lucian's heart skipped a beat, and he swung his gaze in the direction where Archie was pointing. Roxanne's hand outside the covers seemingly twitched. In that instant, all three of them held their breaths as they stared at the hand unblinkingly. A few seconds later, Roxanne's pinky curved slightly but returned to its initial state in the blink of an eye. It was as though that was merely their illusion. Assuming that their mother would be regaining consciousness soon, Archie and Benny waited with anticipation. Alas, Roxanne remained motionless. Benny anxiously grabbed her hand. Mommy, hurry up and wake up. I'm scared. Frowning deeply, Lucian went over to the door and summoned the specialists. Her hand moved earlier. Why isn't she awake yet? The specialists' expressions turned grim when they heard that. One of the reputable doctors hurried over to the bed and performed a series of examinations on Roxanne. When he was done, he shook his head helplessly. Oh, what does that mean? Lucian's tone sounded incredibly cold. Meanwhile, Archie and Benny stared fixedly at the adults. In response, the specialist said, I've examined Ms. Jarvis, and she's showing no signs of regaining consciousness. What you saw just now, her fingers curling, was probably just a reflex of her nerves. She's trying her best too, but she needs a final push. Right as those words left his mouth, the ward plunged into a deathly silence. Only the sound of Benny's sobbing could be heard. Lucian frowned as he pondered deeply. A final push. Who else does this woman care about that I haven't thought of? Suddenly, Archie approached Lucian and tugged at the hem of his clothes. Mr. Farwell. Hence, Lucian looked down at the boy while trying to lessen the iciness in his gaze. Archie suggested sweetly, could you let Essie come here and talk to Mommy? Upon hearing that, Lucian felt his heart tense. It hurt so much that he could not breathe properly. Oh, right. Essie. He almost forgot Estella was just as important as the boys were to Roxanne. Moreover, Estella was Roxanne's flesh and blood. Maybe they're connected telepathically to a certain extent. At that thought, Lucian held Archie's hand and instructed grimly, stay here with Mommy and keep talking to her. I'll get someone to bring Essie over now. Archie's face was wet with tears. The moment he heard those words, he broke into a smile. Mommy will definitely wake up if Essie could come. The boys could sense their mother's longing and worry for Estella. At that, Lucian nodded calmly. As he walked out of the ward, he instructed Caden, go to the manor and bring Estella here. Caden had been waiting in the corridor after bringing the boys over. When Caden heard Lucian's orders, he was stunned but quickly came to his senses. True. Miss Jarvis was the one who gave birth to Ms. Estella. Perhaps a miracle will happen. With that thought in mind, Caden agreed without hesitation and hurried off. Normally, the journey to the manor would take 30 minutes. However, Caden had already parked the car in front of the Farwell residence after 20 minutes. Since he knew the password to the door, he opened it and strolled into the mansion. It was already past 10 o'clock at night, but the mansion was still brightly lit. Estella's lips were pressed together as she sat on the couch with an aggrieved look, hugging her knees at the same time. She looked as if she did not want anyone to approach her. Standing beside her was Catalina, looking exasperated. Meanwhile, Aubrey was trying to approach the little girl with a smile. That was how it had been the entire night. Catalina let out a quiet sigh of relief when she saw Caden. Mr. Lawson, please help us talk some sense into Ms. Estella. She refuses to sleep." When Aubrey heard that, she recalled the incident where Caden had ruined her plans. Displeased, she shut her mouth. Meanwhile, Estella glanced over with a frown. "Ms. Estella, Miss Pearson," Caden greeted them politely. Aubrey merely hummed a cold response. "Mr. Farwell has instructed me to bring Ms. Estella to him," Caden informed nonchalantly. As soon as he finished his sentence, Estella's eyes lit up, and she loosened her arms around her knees. At the same time, there was a change in Aubrey's countenance. "Where's Lucian?" There was an urgent look on Aubrey's face, as if she wanted to personally bring Estella to Lucian. Lucian had been treating Aubrey coldly ever since Estella got bullied at the kindergarten. In fact, Aubrey had not met Lucian for the past few days. That day, she had a golden opportunity to wait for Lucian to return by using Estella as an excuse. To her dismay, not only did Lucian not return, but he even sent Caden to pick Estella up. Naturally, Aubrey would not miss out on that opportunity. Alas, Caden apologized coldly. "I'm sorry, Miss Pearson. It's not my place to reveal Mr. Farwell's schedule." Aubrey's expression darkened as soon as she heard that. "What do you mean you can't reveal his schedule? Don't you forget I'm Lucian's fiancée. Why are you hiding his schedule from me?" Aubrey questioned, glaring furiously at Caden. Nonetheless, Caden was unfazed. "I know you're Mr. Farwell's fiancée, but I'll still be saying the same thing even if Mrs. Farwell is here today." Aubrey gritted her teeth in fury. "You don't go overboard, Caden. This obtuse man was the one who ruined my plans last time. And now, he's keeping Lucian's schedule a secret from me." Caden merely lowered his head and explained, "If you think there's no need to hide it from you, you may give Mr. Farwell a call. He still has some time to answer some calls, after all. He'll tell you if he thinks you should know about it." Having said that, he turned to look at Estella. "Let's go, Miss Estella." Estella immediately leaped off the couch, ran to him, and held his hand sweetly. With that, Caden led the girl away. Aubrey purpled with fury as she watched them leave. "I'll go with you." After placing Estella in the car, Caden shut the door and said firmly, "Mr. Farwell has only instructed me to bring Ms. Estella over. If you'd like to tag along, please give Mr. Farwell a call. I'll bring you along if he gives." Aubrey's expression froze when she heard that. Strangely, she felt slightly confident when she recalled the fact that Lucian had taken the initiative to call her that afternoon. Hence, she pulled out her phone and called him. Unfortunately, the call was declined after the first ring. The screen on the phone reflected Aubrey's vicious expression. "If there's nothing else, I'll leave with Ms. Estella first. I'll pick you up if Mr. Farwell instructs me to do so." Caden sounded incredibly polite. After saying that, he got into the car and drove in the direction of the hospital. As she watched Caden's car disappear from her line of sight, she snatched a handful of flowers at the mansion's entrance and watched the petals fall to the ground. Gnashing her teeth, she crushed them all. "Mr. Lawson, where are we going?" On their way to the hospital, Estella cast Caden a puzzled look. However, a pained look appeared on his face when he heard the question. After some time, he said awkwardly, "You'll find out once we're there. Don't worry. Mr. Farwell is waiting for us there." Pouting, Estella fell silent for a while before suddenly asking, "Is Miss Jarvis there, too?" She missed Roxanne terribly, especially that day. Caden merely flashed her a bitter smile, not knowing how to answer her question. Estella then added, "Can we see Miss Jarvis first, then? Just a short while will do. Then, we can go to Daddy." Caden's heart ached when he heard that. Meanwhile, Estella was staring at him with anticipation through the rearview mirror. Gulping, Caden forced a smile. Miss Jarvis is with Mr. Farwell. You'll see her later. Estella's eyes lit up instantly. Caden could feel how happy Estella was without turning around, but his heart sank at the thought of what she was about to see later. Shortly after, the car stopped in front of the hospital. Estella had become silent long ago. Clearly, she noticed where they were heading to. Caden, too, moved stiffly as he uttered, "We're here, Miss Estella. Come on. I'll take you in." With that, he reached out to help her out. Right then, Estella hopped off the back seat and sped into the hospital. Seeing that, Caden quickly shut the door and hurried after her. After bringing her into the elevator, he realized her eyes were already reddened. Feeling sorry for her, Caden looked away, for he could not bear to take another look at her face. Thankfully, it did not take long for the elevator to reach the top floor. The moment the elevator opened, Estella rushed out and threw herself at Lucian, who was waiting outside. Estella had been worried during the entire journey. By the time she spoke, she was already choking up. "Hey, Daddy, where's Miss Jarvis? I want to see her." Lucian stared solemnly at Caden, who looked utterly helpless. After some time, Lucian retracted his gaze and patted Estella's head. "She's asleep. Why don't you go wake her up?" With that, Lucian picked her up and walked toward the ward. Along the way, he said, "When you go in, try to talk to Miss Jarvis more, okay?" Estella nodded, sobbing. When she saw the boys crying so miserably, tears began to flow down her face. Lucian's heart ached when he heard Estella's sobs. Even so, he kept himself composed and carried her into the ward. "Miss Jarvis." As soon as they entered the ward, Estella wriggled out of his embrace and ran toward Roxanne. Miss Jarvis, what's wrong with you? Please wake up. I miss you so much. Don't frighten me, please. I promise to be a good girl and not make you angry anymore." Benny grabbed his mother's hand and shook it carefully. "Mommy, Essie's here. Please wake up and look at her." Archie, on the other hand, was sobbing silently by the side. After watching them for some time, he realized Roxanne was still unconscious. Biting his lips, he walked over to Lucian and asked, "Mr. Farwell, can we really wake Mommy up?" They had been speaking to Roxanne for a long time. Even Essie had arrived. Still, Roxanne showed no signs of regaining consciousness. Archie could not help but doubt the veracity of the adult's words. Lucian glanced at the unresponsive woman on the bed, then at the heartbroken boy. He just could not bring himself to say anything. After all, he began speaking to Roxanne even before the children arrived. His doubts for the method were greater than theirs. However, he could not bear to confirm their doubts. After all, that was the children's only hope. He did not know how the children would react if they realized he too believed the method was not working. Suddenly, the door was opened from the outside. Lucian, whose blood was burning with unvented anger, turned around, wanting to scold the intruder when he saw the anxious looks on the specialists' faces. Hurry! Miss Jarvis' brain waves are showing signs of waking up." The crowd in the room were stunned. Archie was the first to come to his senses. He tugged at Roxanne's hand and called out, "Your Mommy! Mommy, wake up!" Benny, too, followed suit. Meanwhile, Estella stood frozen beside Lucian for some time before frantically wiping her tears and hugging Roxanne's arm. "Miss Jarvis!" Estella called out again. As if influenced by the boys, her words changed. Mommy, wake up, please." In no time, cries of the three children filled the ward. When Lucian heard Estella addressing Roxanne differently, his eyes trembled, but he said nothing. He simply stood beside them and watched the woman on the bed. Maybe she'll really wake up, since the specialists say she's waking up soon. In truth, Roxanne had only been unconscious for half a day, but to him, it felt as if she had been unconscious for half of his lifetime. It was the first time he realized how important she was to him. Roxanne, wake up, please, he murmured softly. In the next second, a specialist cried out, they are moving.
Miss Jarvis' eyes are moving." The children cried out more anxiously, Mommy, Mommy." In the meantime, Roxanne felt as if she were in a dream she could not get out of. At first, everything was dark in her dream. She could not see anything. No matter how hard she called out for help, outsiders did not seem to hear her. Just as she was feeling hopeless, she heard noises ringing out beside her ears. It sounded as if someone was murmuring into her ears. She tried her best to catch what they were saying, but to no avail. It was not until the words "Mommy" vibrated against her eardrums. Only then did Roxanne realize they were Archie's and Benny's voices. "They're here to save me. I've got to wake up." Roxanne kept struggling, wanting to open her eyes. She tried hard until she was exhausted, but it was fruitless. Roxanne helplessly scanned the darkness around her, feeling extremely sorry for the boys. "I'm sorry, Archie and Benny. I really want to wake up and keep you company, but I just can't. Mommy." Just then, a sweet, gentle voice rang in her ears. Immediately after that, her surroundings lit up slightly. Roxanne's heart lurched, and she looked around. That voice sounded like the child she assumed had died, the child she had been constantly thinking of. Mommy, stop sleeping." A little girl in a cute skirt appeared in her vision. Her face was blurry, but Roxanne could sense the former was crying. The girl held Roxanne's hand and led her in the dark. Roxanne was stunned to see the girl's figure, but she did not stop the latter. Finally, they arrived before a glowing door. The girl gave Roxanne a push at the waist, gesturing for the latter to get out quickly. However, Roxanne could not bring herself to move. She had finally gotten to see that child. Naturally, she did not have the heart to leave the girl alone. Slowly, Roxanne squatted to touch the little girl's head. However, she seemed to have noticed the girl smiling at her. Roxanne's nose stung. She wanted to apologize to the girl, but the lump in her throat prevented her from doing. "Get out quickly, Mommy. You'll see me when you wake up," the girl urged, tilting her head. Roxanne's eyes trembled violently. "My daughter died long ago. How am I going to see her again once I wake up?" Nonetheless, the little girl gave her an urgent push. Archie's and Benny's cries traveled into Roxanne's ears again. After much hesitation, Roxanne finally stood up. Before leaving, she could not help but look back at the tiny figure behind her. The little girl waved. Roxanne forced a smile and marched toward the door. Mommy." The children's cries were becoming clearer. As Roxanne slowly opened her eyes, she stared at the glaring white ceiling with moistened eyes. She's awake. Miss Jarvis is awake." The specialists who had been waiting by the door stared at her unblinkingly. The moment the crowd saw her open her eyes, they cheered happily. Lucien, too, noticed Roxanne's eyes were opened, and he was filled with disbelief. It was not until he heard the specialists' voices that he snapped back to reality. Still, he could not believe what had happened. She's awake? He had been waiting for so long that he was about to lose hope. And now, Roxanne was finally awake. The three children gripped her hands tightly, so tightly that she felt as if her hands were going to break. Only then did Roxanne slowly regain her senses. Even though she was in a daze, she heard the cry of a little girl amidst all the sounds. Thinking back to what the little girl in her dream said, Roxanne widened her eyes in surprise and looked in the voice's direction. The person who came into view was a teary-eyed Estella. She, too, was crying out the word "Mommy" along with the boys. A self-deprecating smile crept to Roxanne's lips when she saw Estella's face. "My daughter died long ago. Why am I still having visions like that?" Archie had been controlling himself since the beginning. Though he was also crying, he was more composed than his younger siblings. Seeing Roxanne was awake, Archie could not hold it in anymore and burst into tears, throwing himself into her embrace. "Mommy, you're finally awake." In the next second, the other two children threw themselves at her as well. It took Roxanne a few seconds to regain her senses before hugging them back. Though Roxanne thought Estella was not the daughter who died, she had always treated Estella as if she was her own. There. Stop crying. I'm fine. Sorry for scaring you. It's my fault. Roxanne comforted the children weakly. However, the children did not stop crying, and it made Roxanne's heart ache. Suddenly, a deep, hoarse voice rang out. Do you know how long you've been sleeping? Roxanne stiffened. She belatedly noticed Lucian was present as well. I must have lost my mind from sleeping too long. How could the children be here if not for Lucian? Mr. Farwell. Roxanne slowly released the children and cast him a conflicted look. Looked extremely restless and frustrated. It was her first time seeing Lucian looking so haggard. The look on Lucian's face threw Roxanne into a slight daze. Why is he like this? Is he worried about me? But we're not in any relationship. What's the reason that's making him so worried? Lucian let out a deep sigh of relief, feeling as if the weight in his heart was lifted. Glancing at the dumbfounded woman on the bed, he stepped forward impulsively. His gaze was so intense as if he was going to make a hole in her face. Upon meeting his gaze, Roxanne felt an odd feeling creeping into her heart, so she turned away wanting to avoid it. How are you feeling? Do you feel any discomfort? Asked Lucian before she could turn away. Roxanne's heart twinged when she heard his hoarse voice. In the end, she lowered her gaze to conceal her emotions. I don't know. It just feels like I've been sleeping for a long time. Frowning, Lucian suddenly reached out to feel her forehead. Roxanne froze, and her mind went blank. Meanwhile, Lucian placed his hand on her forehead for a long time. He did not know what was wrong with him. He was clearly aware that Roxanne was poisoned, yet he chose to show his care for her using such a poor excuse. Then again, he really did not know how else to show his concern. Even the children were stupefied. Benny asked innocently, Mommy, are you having a fever? His voice brought the adults back to reality. At that, Roxanne turned her head to dodge Lucian's hand, flashing the children a comforting smile. Just as she was about to say no, she recalled Lucian's actions earlier. If she were to deny that, then it would be even more difficult to explain Lucian's gesture. For a moment, Roxanne did not know how to answer the children. Thankfully, one of the specialists voiced up. Miss Jarvis has just awakened. We'll need to examine her body. Mr. Farwell, can you bring the children out for a moment? Lucian fell silent for several seconds before nodding. Let's go out first, he said to the children. Of course, the children were reluctant to leave. It had not been easy waiting for Roxanne to wake up, after all. Estella held Roxanne's hand tightly, looking utterly uneasy. She feared Roxanne would go back to sleep after she left. Roxanne could see the fear on their faces, and she could not help but feel sorry for them. Be good, okay? Go out for a while. I'll wait for all of you to come back. With that said, she patted the children's heads. Still, Estella was reluctant to leave. Darlings, please go out, okay? Miss Jarvis just woke up, so she shouldn't get too emotional. Otherwise, it would affect her condition. Surely you don't want anything to happen to her again, right? Coaxed one of the specialists patiently. Hearing that, the children glanced at Roxanne hesitantly. Archie walked over to Estella and held her hand firmly. Let's go. We'll wait outside while the doctors examine Mommy. Seeing the uneasy look on Estella's face, he comforted patiently. Don't be scared. She's already awake. Nothing will happen to her again. Only then did Estella give a slow nod and walked out of the room with the boys, glancing back with every step she took. Meanwhile, Lucian told the specialists a few words before turning around to leave. Miss Jarvis, we never knew you were acquainted with Mr. Farwell, commented one of the specialists who had met Roxanne before.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.